So it's taken me a while to get around to making a review on Need for Speed Unbound, and that is because of one reason. I just didn't care enough. Which is strange, as I genuinely do feel as if Unbound is a good racing game. It has arguably the best handling in years, customization that adds on to the last few entries, and of course, a handful of more cars. It even has a larger, more focused story. So why am I making this video instead of a glowing review, talking about how excited I was to play the game after 2 whole years of waiting to get a next-gen console? And more years since, Heat's support stopped. Why did I uninstall it the second I beat the story, despite feeling as though it was a good game from start to finish? At first I thought it was because maybe, somehow, I had just grown to move past Need for Speed, and that would make sense, as I've since gotten into the F1 games and have poured hundreds of hours into the last 2 entries alone. That was until I started buying the Need for Speed DS ports, and quite honestly enjoying those games more than this, as well as going back to 2015 and Heat, and just getting more entertainment out of those games despite having close to 1,000 hours in both of them already. Then, it finally dawned on me. Need for Speed Unbound just isn't a memorable game. Lakeshore as a location, for one, is inconsistent with the rest of the game's art style. The cel-shaded characters simply just don't work with a city as drab as this. I'd expect graffiti on all the walls, striking colours as far as the eye can see, but instead this is like if you mixed Sunset Overdrive with the original Watch Dogs. A story and character roster such as the one presented in Unbound would have fit right in with the last game, Miami-inspired Palm City. Instead, we have wind trails, graffiti wings, anime nitrous, and as I mentioned prior, the cel-shaded characters, and within this city, it just doesn't work. Payback's Fortune Valley is more consistent than this. Hell, Nitro on DS did elements of this better. Look, I don't want this to be a hate piece. I've been playing Need for Speed ever since I was 4 years old, enjoying Carbon for the first time. Most Wanted 2012 is one of my favourite racing games ever made. Pro Street was awesome even on the DS. Shift 1 was solid. The Run was a blockbuster. Hot Pursuit and Rivals are also solid, and not to mention Underground and Most Wanted, like the original. I know how diverse this series can get, yet still provide memorable games, so I cannot stress enough just how much Unbound inexplicably fails at being a memorable game. Story is always going to be a hit or miss with this series, but forgive me for believing that we turned a corner after Heat. It may have been short, but it was the most engaging story we'd had in a while. The plot was basic, but solid, and the characters genuinely had believable personalities and backstories, with Anna and Lucas being some of the best allies in a hot minute. Lieutenant Mercer being a decent villain, although Officer Shaw totally stole the show. A lot of us left that game wanting more like that, but Unbound honestly feels like Payback in how the cops literally mean barely anything from a narrative standpoint and just serve as roadblocks between and in the middle of events, no pun intended. Don't get me wrong, I love their gameplay and how certain deployments require different tactics, such as driving off-road if the high-speed Corvettes are chasing you because you ain't outrunning them on the road. I like it a lot, and I think it builds on Heat quite well, but when are these developers going to realise that the cops work best when integrated into the story? Don't get me wrong again, 2015 and Carbon work well for the story they're trying to tell, without the cops being a major plot device, but those games are exceptions. Payback didn't get away with making the police hardly important, so why should Unbound? The story even feels like Payback, with the way that our big bad isn't even the true villain in the end. Except Unbound is even worse. We're literally allies and with our main villain by the end of the game, and it just takes so much tension out of the final events. Like, I get why it's written like that, with the whole adopted family thing, but if you're going to start a revenge narrative and then switch it halfway through, you better do a better job than this, because our actual villain who causes the events is literally the Collector from Payback. We never even see them. It's like y'all had plans for DLC or something and never followed through with it. Again. At least Payback had the decency to imply that Lena got what was coming to her with the mobsters surrounding her, while Jazz in Unbound gets off so lightly that the game just falls flat in the end. And multiplayer, where do I even begin? Having a separate garage from your single player takes away the fun of online free roam for me. Like, no, I'd rather just go back to Heat. One of the best parts of finishing Heat or 2015 was hopping onto the multiplayer afterwards with my best friend to show each other our rides and then do races together. Hell, you could do story missions within that same lobby with no problems. What was so hard about making a multiplayer like that with the extra step of being able to do those story missions together? Do a separate speedless garage all you like if you want to glaze the Most Wanted 2012 multiplayer, but please don't mess with the online free roam again, because not all of us want to be rammed by other players all day to unlock a fucking Ford Focus. And there's my review of Need for Speed Unbound. It's finally done after months of putting it off over just not wanting to really put any time towards it due to the apathy I feel for it, and now I can move on. See you next year, or whenever the next Need for Speed comes out, because that's the worst part. If you're disappointed with the current entry, you get to wait 3 or so years for the next one. Great! Thanks, EA!